it's gonna ruin my business. I would burn all this down for him, because he's such a blessing. So he rode in a backpack as I was mechanically building my lab or this and that, and he got to see a lot of stuff. And that kid's he's a really good student now. He's in special, he's really doing very good. Accelerated classes. So all this has been just a really fantastic journey that I'm experiencing in my life. I was in a printing trade, and it was humdrum, man-made stress, and all that's gone now. The only stress I have is if I don't get my act together and make it work. So.
John, can you tell them about the mushroom workshops that you did for the garden clubs when we did the log?
Yeah, and I might get back at that again too. So I would go out, and my neighbors or I'd find some oak logs, and so you need to harvest the logs in winter when the sap's down and the leaves are off the trees. That way the bark stays on the logs. So I'd cut some nice logs of that big a diameter, and you need to let them season for like 10 days because every tree has a little bit of antifungal. So you let that dissipate, and so I would invite people, have them sign up to, I forget what I charged back then, it was only like $25 or something, it was pretty cheap, but it was so fun. So a group like yourself here, I'd give you each a log, and then we take turns drilling the holes in the logs. Everybody would bring a drill if they had it, and I would make spawn plugs out of furniture dowel pins. So I would sterilize the little dowel pins, they're just little plugs. I'd sterilize that, and then in my lab I'd inoculate them with the mycelium of shiitakes. And then so everybody would drill holes in their logs and then pound the plugs in, and we'd heat up beeswax, and then you'd seal the holes where the plugs are with beeswax. And it takes, like I said, it takes a year to colonize a shiitake log. So again, the patience, some people had real good luck with it, some maybe didn't take care of them, but it was a really lot of fun.
I got about 3 good flushes out of it, and the woodpeckers really loved it.
Oh, yeah. I know squirrels will chew on the bark a bit too and stuff.
What did you say took a year?
So when I made the shiitake log, when everybody made logs, you drill holes and wax them over. You got to just let that colonize for a year. It takes a year before that mycelium leaves off that little plug that we put in there. Actually, one log, you'd put 25 plugs in one log, 25 to 30 plugs. And so it took a good year, depending on the weather too. And the ends of the log would get white with mycelium. That was a good indication that they're growing.
And where do you have them while you're waiting for the shoot?
Well, they stay outside, and you put them in, keep them out of the sun, and hide them in the shade somewhere,
Even in Ohio?
Yeah, and all winter long. And then, so what those logs will do naturally, they'll when the warm spring rains come, they'll excite the mycelium to fruit. And then when the cold starts coming, and the cold winter rains start up, they'll fruit again. So naturally they'll try to grow twice a year on their own. But you can actually take a log and soak it overnight and pull it out, and that kind of shocks that mycelium to grow more shiitakes. So there's some growers out there. I know there's a lady in Peninsula that just opened up a store, and her and her husband grow shiitake logs, and that's a lot of labor, because you have to prop them up, and then when you want to fruit some, you got to haul them to a trough or to a creek or pond and soak them, and then it's a lot of heavy lifting and everything else. Where this isn't so bad. So in my grow rooms, I have what I did is I took metal studs, like the wall studs for metal drywall. They're galvanized, and then metal conduit for shelving. So it's really easy clean up. And well, heck, they're 15 years old, and they've got a patina on them, but they're not rusting away, And so each one of these
Do you have
blocks.
to wait a year on those?
No, this stays in my lab for 2 months, and then when it's in a plastic bag, and once I notice it's getting brown, it's really white to start with. The mycelium makes the sawdust, but this was loose powdery sawdust, which is amazing, right? Yeah. And so then 2 months in the lab, and then I pull it out. It takes a couple weeks of getting wet and rained on with my misting set up to produce mushrooms. Any questions?
How long will that continue to make mushrooms then?
I get about four flushes on that, so it depends on the weather. If it's summertime, this summer's have been difficult, and they're getting hotter. You know, they're just, I can see it with my system. So I am working on, I've got a passive cooling, I've got how big is that thing? It's a huge cistern in it used to be an old dairy barn, right? So it's got a huge cistern of water. So I put a big PEX heating coil down in the bottom of this thing, and I run that through my grow houses, and it'll pull some of the heat away, and it's helping. But I'm just always trying to do passive, you know, so I'm not paying an electricity bill, and my carbon footprint isn't huge doing this. I want to try to be sustainable about it. So it's been, you know, the last few years it's been difficult, and then the fly population. When I first started growing these, I didn't have an insect problem really too much, but once they smelled it from the woods, they moved into the neighborhood, you know. Yeah, there's one that's called it's called a pleasing fungus beetle. It's a pretty little thing. It's got yellow stripes on it. It's a tiny little thing, and boy, are they prolific. But it's funny. At the farmer's market, there's a little boy that was interested, and I said, hey, I showed him the insects, and I said, they're sweet. I ate one. You know, well, there's a lot of countries that eat insects for food, right? But the bug's actually sweet, so he says, can I have one? And I looked at his dad and mom, and they're like, yeah, let him. And so I bought him a jar the next week. I said, only eat one a day, though. Pleasing fungus beetles.
Might other things try to grow on that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. When I first started, that's what my wife was worried about. What if this rogue, spore came floating into my lap and started growing on there, and it crossed with the shiitake? It can't do that. I mean, I've had. If you let this go beyond 2 months growing in a grow house, it will start getting rotty and get molds and so the flies can bring in stuff, but I know what a shiitake looks like, and there's nothing going to be imitating this, you know. But there is other bacteria and other funguses that do get in there. But usually it's, you know what slime mold is? Anybody hear of slime mold? And that you know, it takes one fly that was in the woods and got it on its feet. It flies in there and lands on not a healthy substrate, but something that's dying, you know, it's beyond its time, and that stuff can grow like wildfire. That it just flops in there. But you know, I got to have a careful eye, make sure I'm not sowing some odd mushroom for somebody.
Well, I assume you carry pretty heavy liability insurance.
I do have farm insurance, yeah.
So when we go to Heinen's, we see bins of fresh mushrooms and everything in there. Where are those coming from?
So there's a place in Pennsylvania, Kennett Square. They claim to be the mushroom capital of the world, or at least America. They say 60% of the mushrooms that people buy, mostly the button mushrooms that we're normally used to.
Oh, button, yeah.
But yeah, most of them are coming from the big farms in Pennsylvania.
So they have what you have on a mammoth scale.
Yeah, I mean they're growing tons of mushrooms a week.
Yeah.
Or, you know, my goal is to keep 100 pounds going out of my farm owner. That's my goal. I get there on occasion, but it's usually about 70, 80 pounds. 100 pounds, that's a lot of mushrooms, you know, for one guy just to make it work. Where these big mega growers are producing a ton a week, you know, mushrooms.
We went there when the ADS had their national show out there.
Oh, to the mushroom farm?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because they're like the mushroom capital of the world. They call it. That was on the.
Did you go down into the caves then?
They don't let people do that anymore.
Oh.
They brought it to a room, and so we saw the things that they were growing them on.
Yeah.
But we didn't see the major, they said it was just too much liability.
Yeah. I've never been there, but my brother-in-law said he went down, and this was years ago.
This was a couple years ago. And they don't,
So So the button
Of
mushrooms
course, they
that
didn't
we're,
trust us on
the button mushrooms that we're normally used to, they grow on compost and manure. So there's no poop involved with my mushrooms. They're woodland mushrooms. And so the button mushrooms, they don't need sunlight. They're cave dwelling. The French discovered them in a cave somewhere in France, and they learned how to cultivate them, and it, exploded from there, mushroomed from there, right? So, but yeah, they're dark. I guess I got a book that was written in the 30s, and even in New York City, everybody had horses, right? There was trolleys and everything had horses. So there was a lot of people that grew mushrooms in their basements because there was access to horse manure. So horse manure and straw. I mean, it's pretty simple, but it's a bit of a process to commercially do
I
it.
bet they don't have the health properties that yours do, they're button
They
mushrooms.
don't. They have there's quite a bit of minerals and such, but there's a mycologist out west that has claimed that even they say this, the button mushrooms are, he claims they're carcinogenic,
Oh.
but, but these are truly are, so to eat raw mushroom, I have to tell you this one, so when I started growing those log mushrooms, and I was so fascinated with them, I was eating these things raw, and they're pretty good raw. I developed this rash on my arm. I said, well, I was out in the garden in my onion patch, but there's no poison ivy out there. It doesn't quite look like poison ivy. It was just on my left hand arm. It was bumpy and it was nasty. I did research, and there's certain people that are allergic to raw shiitakes, and I'm one of them. But by cooking them, it destroys that chemical or that thing. So, and that's with all what I've learned with all mushrooms. You really shouldn't eat any mushrooms raw because you're not getting the nutritional or medicinal value out of them. You need to break the cell wall by cooking them. So by cracking that cell wall by heat. So I dry the oysters.
That's the opposite of most things.
Yeah.
Most things you're supposed to eat raw.
Right. But yeah, no, you won't get the nutritional value out of it. And oysters do have a slight toxicity to them raw. It won't hurt you, but it could give you stomach distress. There's one mushroom that grows in the woods that a lot of people rave about. I don't really care for it that much. It's called chicken of the woods, or sulfur mushroom. So if anybody's ever foraged or looked out in the woods, it's a bright orange and yellow mushroom. It can get quite large. It grows at the base of a tree. And that one, for sure, if you don't cook it properly, it can mess your stomach up.
Why can't we learn to cultivate morel mushrooms?
I was working with USDA scientist just 2 years, and he was in touch with a Chinese scientist, and they're growing it by the hectare like you wouldn't believe. I've seen photographs of a valley surrounded by a big mountain range, and they've got greenhouse hoop frames. Like a couple hundred, not 100 miles, but a huge area, and they've got giant black morels growing in there. So he gave us a lot of information, and so we tried it at my farm, but I'm in hard clay, sun-baked Valley City. It's not like in a valley, so, that, because the pictures I've seen, just imagine being surrounded by mountains, all that fog rolls in every morning. It's just a different atmosphere, a different thing. But we tried, with the knowledge, there's some supplemental blocks you can put in for nutrients. So we did like 10 test plots with different soil conditions and tried to experiment with it. The mycelium was running fantastic. I had my fingers crossed. This looked really promising. About January, because you keep it covered until spring. So I had plastic cover with holes in it so it can kind of breathe. By January, the mycelium was growing to the food source that we made. It looked really healthy, and then it just slowly declined, and it just never took. So, I might try it again. I've got an orchard, an old orchard on my property that hasn't been touched, and a lot of the morels will grow in there. But not right now. I'm too busy with getting that autoclave going.
How long do mushrooms last after I buy them and bring them home to put in my refrigerator?
Yeah, so usually I pick mine for a farmer's market, or even like this one was just picked before I came here. This will last a good 10 days. So what I do is I sell it in a paper bag. You know, put it in a paper bag and put it in the fridge. And all it will do is start drying out. The button mushroom industry puts it in a plastic container, wraps it with a nice thick piece of plastic, because they want it to go bad, I think, you know? So you're like, oh, the mushrooms are bad, we better go buy more, right?
Yeah.
So, but if you treat them properly, you know, you can put this in a bowl with a cloth over it in the refrigerator. Like I said, it won't mold, it'll just start drying up. And then you can rehydrate it and use it in soups and such, you know?
Wow.
That's about it.
Did you have a background in chemistry? You seem so adept at it.
No, just fascinated with biology and there was so back in '93, I went through a divorce and I was a wreck because I've got older children and I lost custody of the kids just because of the stupid court system. You know, I didn't do anything wrong and I just had to get emotional about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I had to get my head on straight, you know, because I could have turned into a raging alcoholic or who knows what, right? So I moved back in the woods. I lived in a teepee for 3.5 years. I worked, I still worked, I did all my obligations. I joined Brunswick Rec Center and I would, before work or after work, I'd go to take a shower and I'd go back in the woods. I had a hole where I put a clay tile down, that was my refrigerator. And I had an outhouse back in the woods and it was renewing. It was spiritually brought me back to John Burmeister again, you know, made me so healthy. And I loved it. Learned how to make good fires. I was in there, I think it was 94 or 95. We had the record cold, it was -25 for just about a whole week. And I never feared for my life. It was cold. I had pine boughs in my teepee on the floor where the bedding was, about this thick, white pine boughs. A piece of canvas over top of that, a couple old quilts of down comforters, and then a mummy bag, and then a couple wool blankets on top, right?
Wow.
Those nights when it was that cold, everything's frozen, so I'm pulling frozen blanket off of me, you know, my perspiration. And you could, like I said, I never feared for my life, but you could feel the little needles coming in and poking you, saying, you know, it's really cold here, I'll make one false move, and you're gonna lose a toe. But it was,
Oh my gosh.
one of the experiences it was Christmas time, feeling pretty melancholy, and cold, crisp night where you hear the jets going across and just make that crackling noise and the snow crunch. And I went out to the edge of the woods and I could see the farmhouses and the streets with the Christmas lights on. And, kneeled down in the snow and all the electricity went off. And you could hear dogs barking, I could sense people panicking, right? I turned around and looked and my kerosene lantern's still going and my fire is going. Thanks, God.
Oh my God.
Life's good, you know, so with that experience and then just love of nature, the Creator kind of brought me to this, I guess, you know.
You did?
And,
I've seen that on YouTube called Living Off the Grid.
yeah,
Yeah, people do that.
That was truly living off the grid. My utility bill was $5. That was for a gallon of the kerosene, for my lantern,
Wow.
an old railroad lantern. So that was a neat trip. It was fun.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
What farmers markets do you do?
Yeah.
Right now I do Crocker Park. Yeah. I used to do Medina at the square, and it was a great market, but I want to treat the managers right. We weren't in the park. We put us out in the street. They planted a monoculture grass in the park, right? And so, no dandelions, and so, one market could be mud.
Trampled, yeah.
Trampled. If they would have left it alone, you could drive cars on it, right? So the parks director said, we gotta get them off the square, so they put it up on the street. And my setup was, if you ever saw me in a farmer's market, I've got little And I was the only one that could fit in underneath this oak tree, because everybody else had big market tents. And I love that spot. And after I lost that, I'm like, man, I better, well, what happened was the market manager decided to start another market in Medina. And they chose the VFW, which is a nice spot, but it just didn't feel right. And so I left there and went to Prague.
Nice.
So is the Crocker one still going on every weekend? The
Yeah.
Crocker still has a farmer's market?
Yeah, it's gonna go on till December 15th outside.
Oh, boy.
I've done it for 2 years. It can be tough. I put my pack boots on and,
Get out that old kerosene lantern.
yeah, well, it was fun. Pre-COVID, I would bring my, like one of those turkey, natural gas, propane turkey cookers. But I'd have a big pot of mushrooms. So that's for donations. But
Oh my God, how cute.
I can share some recipes with this too. I don't have mushrooms to offer anybody for sale. Nancy mentioned if anybody, but it's been a little bit slow this last couple weeks. But you know, if you find a farmer's market or find oyster mushrooms, you've never had them. They make the best cream of mushroom soup.
Oyster mushroom.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll take a little beef broth, tear the mushrooms apart, throw them in the broth, just enough so they can simmer in there. Add a little sea salt, add some of the thyme, cook them, let them simmer till they're thoroughly cooked, blend them up, and then pour them back in the pan, add some heavy cream, a little more salt. That's simple. You can do a cup of soup with it even. And, I'm growing up.
Show of hands, who just got hungry?
Yeah.
You have to prove it.
Yeah.
No soup.
Not as good as that though.
But that's one nice fun thing too, is I've learned how to prepare some pretty nice dishes, like shiitake risotto is always.
Oh my God.
That is wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you. You're
fascinating.
welcome.
You just need to get help. You need to get somebody
Yeah,
on board that can.
Are you doing this all by yourself?
Oh, yeah. So,
How big a place do you have?
well, I have 3 acres, 3-acre farm, but it's mostly indoor, growing facility.
Yeah.
And, I have a garden and greenhouse. But, I may have somebody, I've got one prospect, a young guy that seems like he's interested. It's just, I don't know if another worker can do it the way I want it done,
But you have to have somebody to leave your legacy to, because
Yeah.
all this knowledge and experience and
Yeah.
blessing has to go into something.
Well, that's right, you're right.
You can't just let it go.
Yeah, well, I like to share it, when I was in the printing trade, years ago, there was I used to operate a gallery camera, which was huge, you could climb in the bellows. It was that big. So we would produce large pieces of film to make printing plates. So we would shoot a color separation, they called it. So it was cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So we'd have to shoot 4 different exposures of artwork, painted or photographed or transparency. And so it was a lot of craftsmanship involved with that. There was an older guy who refused to tell anybody his knowledge. He was just, and I thought, how,
Yeah, that's so
small.
small.
And he ended up pretty much penniless because he started another business when the electronics came in,
Oh, yeah.
and that changed, the gallery cameras went out, all that craftsmanship, those trades disappeared. And he thought he was gonna make a niche, he bought all the new cameras and everything else, and it totally failed on him, right? I mean, bad karma, I guess, So,
Maybe.
I'm so open to tell people how to do this.
Would you do podcasts or, online videos?
Yeah.
You say that and he just like, his eyes glaze over.
Well, I'm just saying the time involved with that, there are people that make a really
Well,
good money
you
doing
can
it,
make money at
Yeah.
doing that.
but it would.
You can get
I don't have
sponsorship
that.
sponsors, you
Yeah.
think, and.
I mean, people are paying $35 for like an hour video, to learn to grow dahlias or corn or whatever.
Wow.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it can be lucrative.
Yeah.
if-
I just share it with you. I know. You might wanna learn how to grow mushrooms, I'll tell you that. Don't don't do it.
Don't do it.
It's not that
No
easy.
kidding.
So it's easy to grow a small scale, you know, like if you wanted to cultivate your own little mushroom patch outside or in, you know, in a moist area, so you could create, I don't recommend it in the basement because oyster mushrooms especially spore like crazy. So that spores could get in your ductwork, get in your lungs. So I'm very careful with that, where I'll wear a mask when they're really heavily sporulating. But my air exchange that I've developed, I really keep my grow rooms really pretty clean. That's the trick of it too, is because they breathe oxygen, you need a lot of air ventilation. So in the middle of winter, it's really hard because you're trying to keep everything from freezing, you know, and keep it at least 50 degrees in there. And you gotta bring in 0-degree air in there. So I do have a device that it helps recover some of the heat as it's bringing in the cold air. I built one thing, but it failed on me. It was 100-foot, 2 tubes that went 100 foot underground, it was 8 foot deep. And it was basically geothermal, but it was just, they call them earth tubes. So it would bring in that 0-degree air down into the earth, where it's 45 degrees. When it comes into the grow house, then it might be 30 degrees, a lot warmer than -10, you know? And it's like preheated, and it's fresh air exchange. But I did it at the wrong time.